Hi everyone, in the last video we added some knee controls to control the direction that our legs are pointing in, and in this video what we're going to do is go through and add in some arm controls. Now, as I've mentioned previously, I'm going to add in some additional joints. I'm going to add in some collarbone joints just in here, and probably also I'll add in perhaps an additional joint running down the arm just here. And what that's going to do is allow us, when we twist the character's wrist around, it should help to reduce the amount of collapsing or pinching that we get in the arms. In order to get that to work properly though, we will need to add an additional division down the middle of the arm just here, which is very easy to do. So we'll be kind of making that modification to the geometry in a second. So first of all, let's add in our additional joints. I'm just going to jump into the front view for a second, so I'll just click my 4 view, and kind of bizarrely in this file I'm getting basically multiples of my front views. This happens now and then with Maya. Basically its cameras get all kind of messed up. So all I'm doing here is just resetting what normally would be the sort of the default. So this one here is normally the front view, and then this one here is normally the top view under the orthographic. Now you can see that really they're not showing up properly. They're kind of looking a bit weird, even though I've set them correctly. This can happen sometimes, so what you can do is switch your renderer option to legacy, and what we need is this view cube switched on. So if you go to display, heads up display, and switch view cube on just here, what this allows you to do is click this little house button, and what that does is it resets the angle of your viewport. This can happen sometimes in Maya if your coordinate system gets switched so that the Z axis is pointing up and your Y axis is pointing forwards, backwards. So that's what's sort of occurred with my file here. So all I'm doing is going through, just switching the renderer to legacy default, and that's so the view cube can actually display. In viewport 2, even if the view cube is active, it can't actually display because of the way that they've designed the software. So it's sort of, you know, it doesn't really function very well. But you can press this little house button and basically it resets your viewport to the correct angles and so on. Okay. Once you've done that, you can just switch back to viewport 2 so that your actual geometry edges display properly. There we go. Alright, so as I was saying, in the front view, I'm just going to hit my spacebar. I'm going to add in an additional joint here, and I'm also going to add in an additional joint in forearm as well. So I'm going to pop into the skeleton menu and go to create joints, and the first thing I'm going to do is create a clavicle joint or a collarbone joint, somewhere in between the spine and the shoulder. Okay, now I can use the mirror joints option to create a right hand collarbone, so I don't need to worry about creating both and getting them in the exact right spot. So I'm going to pop this one sort of somewhere in about, I want to kind of make it kind of close to the arm. It's a weird shape, obviously it's not a human that we're doing, so what this is going to do essentially is act like a pivot point for the shoulder. We're going to put a control up here so that when I move that control, the arm or the whole shoulder is going to move with it. But because of the way that obviously this can is shaped, if I put it too close to the spine, when that pivots, the arm's probably going to sink into the body. So I don't want that to happen too much. So I'm going to place the collar somewhere around about here, like that. I'll just turn the tool off, and then what I'll do is rename this. So I'm just going to call this left collar JNT. I'll just copy that. Actually, I don't need to copy it. The mirror option will fix that for us. So left collar JNT. And then over in the skeleton option, I'm going to go to mirror joints and just double check that my settings are still the same as last time, which they are. So I'll just hit mirror, and that's going to jump across and duplicate one on the other side, which is now called right collar joint. Okay. So what I'm going to do is reparent my shoulder joint onto the collar joint, okay, for both sides. So I'm going to select the shoulder. I'm going to shift select the collar and then just press P on the keyboard, and I'll do the same thing over here. So now they're reparented. Okay. The next thing I want to do is start adding in those shoulder or collar controls. So I'm going to just tap my spacebar. I'm going to pop back into the perspective view here, and what I'm going to do is grab a NURBS curve just here, just a circle, and I'll just create one of those on the grid. And what I want to do is basically move this up, and I want to snap it to the shoulder. So I'm going to use the move tool, and I'm going to grab the snap to points option, and I'm just going to snap this up to the shoulder joint. I can turn off the polygons here for now. I won't need them. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is just switch off point snap again, and I'm going to move this sort of up and out a little bit. I just need enough clearance away from the body. I know that the can edge is pretty much where this joint is, so I just want this to be sort of outside the can and above the arm. And then what we can do is just rotate this around. So I'm just holding down the J key and just rotating this. You can see I've rotated it -90 in this case, or 90 on the X, or sorry, the Z rotation. And basically you can just kind of adjust the scale and the shape and everything if you switch over to control vertices and just select them. Now this is one of the things you can see is a problem with Maya. It always tries to select joints before most other things. So if you're having trouble selecting points in your NURBS circle, you can either shift click them like that and then just grab the last couple using a selection box. You can also turn off the joint selection up here. That'll also basically allow you to just drag a box across the whole thing. It's pretty tedious the way that that software kind of works. So what I'm going to do here basically is just kind of make a shape that's sort of going to wrap around the body basically, or around the top of the arm. So something like this should do. Okay, something like that I think should be fine. Okay, so I'm going to jump back over in object mode. I'm going to mirror this across, or duplicate it across, in the same way that I've done with the knee control. So I'm just going to duplicate it, edit, duplicate, and then I'll just change the X value to a minus, so that we've got one for the other side. Okay, and then what I want to do is place the pivot point of this handle into the middle of the shoulder joint. So I'm going to hold, switch on, sorry, snap to points, hold down the D key, and then drag that to the middle of that joint, just there. Okay, once I've done that, I can freeze the transformations on this object. Don't forget to do the same thing on the other side. Obviously, any of the changes that you do on this side, you'll need to repeat. So we can just do that over there. Okay, so we'll freeze transformations on this. So we'll just go modify, freeze transformations, and we can delete the history. So edit, delete by type history, like that. And I'm just going to call this left shoulder control. Okay, and what we're going to do is basically get the shoulder so that it lines up to the the collarbone lining up to the shoulder. Now at the moment you can see that the collarbone is basically angled towards the grid. It's not the red line on the collarbone doesn't point towards this shoulder. That can cause some problems sometimes, but the settings that we're going to use to connect this onto this should override that, and we shouldn't have a problem. So what I'm going to do is select the shoulder control that we've just created. I'm going to shift select the collarbone, or the collar joint just here, and I'm going to come up to the constrain menu and then down to aim options just here. And what I want to do is make sure I've got maintain offset switched on, and what that's going to do is basically keep this collarbone exactly where it is, this collar joint. It's not going to rotate it or anything. I'm going to switch off the weld up type, so I'm just going to set that to none. Okay, and basically I want to constrain all axes as well just here. So if I hit apply, what that's done now is linked the direction that this points to this object here. Okay, now because this object's position is actually based on its pivot point, which is in the middle of this shoulder joint, if I turn off the point snap there, basically when I move this up and down, you can see that this collarbone is going to point towards the shoulder. All right, so I can basically just make minor adjustments. So what this is for is adjusting the position of the arm just to get a better position when we're animating. So you might not necessarily need to use this, but it's kind of handy to be able to have a handle to shift the arm around if we need to at the shoulder. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add an additional joint just here into the forearm, and what that's going to allow us to do is sort of have a slight forearm twist. Now this is pretty vital for human characters, so that the arms don't collapse, but anything that's got even a remotely human style arm to it, you can set up the same way, as is the case with our character. I'll just close this off. Okay, so what I'm going to do is come up to skeleton, and we've got this insert joints option just here. I'm going to make sure I've got nothing selected as well, so just deselect everything. We'll go skeleton, insert joints. Okay, now if I click on the elbow and then drag towards the forearm, now I'm also keeping in mind up here in the top of the channel box over here, I'm looking at this number as well. So all I'm going to do is place this about halfway down like this, and I'm just taking note of the number up in that box, which is 1.267. Okay, 1.267. I'm then going to do the same thing on the other side, so that I've got it sort of in mind. So I'm just going to click and drag on this side and drag down to the left in this direction until I get the same value. So it's 1.267. It's going to be a negative value, obviously. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple of handles now, one for the wrist, one for the elbow. Okay, so I'm going to grab the circle curve again, and I'll just create a nerve circle. I'm going to grab the move tool and point snap and snap that up to the wrist like that. I'm going to duplicate that, edit, duplicate, and then I'm going to snap that over to the elbow. And you can also, technically you could do the same thing over on that side as well. So edit, duplicate, go to the elbow, and then duplicate it again, Control D, go to the wrist. Okay, I'm going to turn off point snap, and I'm going to grab the two elbow handles and just drag them backwards behind. And then what I'll do is rotate them on the X value by 90 degrees. So rotate X 90. That's going to stand them up straight, and then scale them down. And I want to scale these down so they're about the same size as the knee controls. So that way I know that knee and elbow controls are going to look roughly the same. Okay, something like that. And then I'll freeze the transforms and delete the history. So modify, freeze transformations, edit, delete by type history, like that. With the wrist controls, basically I'm just going to rotate those around. So I can grab both of them. This time I'm going to rotate them on the Z value, so 90 degrees. That's just going to stand them up straight. And I can probably, because our character's arms, if I show the polys again, because the character's arms are so skinny, I can scale these down a little bit, but I still want them to be bigger than the elbow controls, so that way they're not going to get mistaken. And I also still want to leave a reasonable gap around the geometry and the handle themselves. Okay, so something along those lines. Once again, I'm going to freeze the transformations, and I'm going to delete the history, so edit, delete by type history. And now I'm just going to go through and name those. So just starting off with this one, I'm just going to call this left wrist control. I'll copy that, and then I'll paste it in on the elbow control and just change wrist to elbow. This one here, we've already got named. Okay, and it's basically the same thing on this side. So this one here, pretty much you can just go through and rename those. So this one's going to be shoulder. And just make sure that you change the right to a left or left to the right. So that one there's going to be right elbow. And then right wrist. Okay. I'll leave this here, and I will see you in the next one.